Senator Waters.
Mr Neal and Mr Costello, since we know that there's no safe level of climate change above 2 degrees, and to stay below 2 degrees, 2/3 of fossil fuel reserves need to stay in the ground, will the Future Fund consider cutting its investment in fossil fuels by 2/3, commensurate with the science?
Senator Waters, this is an investment inquiry for the Future Fund. I don't think it's appropriate to make statements in regard to climate change allegations and expect the
well, with
officers
respect,
to
it is
respond.
a nature paper, they're not just allegations.
Well, nature is not just the definitive benchmark that the investment managers are determined by. But
it is.
So I'd ask you to
publication.
rephrase your question, or I would say to the officers that they don't have to respond to it.
Will the Future Fund consider cutting its investment in fossil fuels by 2/3, commensurate with the science?
You've heard our answer.
Well, with respect, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
You may
the
respond to
response.
the science of investment. That's what the question
Now, our
is.
answer is we don't exclude fossil fuels from our mandate, and we are tasked with getting a return of CPI plus 4.5% to 5.5%, and we will take decisions which are consistent with that.
Okay, thank you. So science is irrelevant. That's good to have that clarified.
I don't think that's what the witness said at all.
Well, actually, I believe that's precisely what the witness said.
No, that
Unless the
is
witness
not
would like to
what-
correct
Order.
that.
You shouldn't be paraphrasing, Senator.
It is wrong to respond with gratuitous comments, Senator Waters.
Well, if Mr Costello would like to dissuade me from that summary, I'm very happy to be dissuaded of that. I would love to hear that science is relevant.
Senator, order.
I would love to hear science is
Senator
relevant.
Waters, order.
Please, well,
order.
Mr Costello,
Senator
I
Waters,
don't want to
I will take the
verbal
call
you.
away from you. I was explaining the ruling. You do not talk over the chair. You do not talk over the witnesses. If you're going to be discourteous, it will be repaid in kind.
Well, I'm not seeking to be discourteous, nor am I seeking to verbal Mr Costello. So if you would like to correct me in that regard, I was seeking to try to establish the role of science in investment decisions. My summation of your evidence was that it was not a relevant consideration. If that's not an accurate portrayal of your evidence, please do correct the record.
Senator, you're trying to make a political point.
No, I'm genuinely seeking to understand.
And frankly, nothing I say will stop you from making your political point, so you go and make your political point. But I think the people who heard what I've said, and I've been through this many, many occasions, we don't exclude fossil fuels from the portfolio. We invest our portfolio in accordance with our mandate. This is a highly scientific operation. Highly. You ought to see some of the logarithms that are involved in this kind of stuff. And I think, Senator Waters, when you looked at the professionalism of what goes on inside the Future Fund, you would be very, very impressed by it. Leave aside the politics. These are people who are being judged by results and their professionalism. This has been a great thing for Australia. It will be good for future generations. It enjoys the support of both sides of the parliament, and I hope it enjoys the support of the Greens as well.
Well, of course it does. It's never been contended. But,
Oh, well,
thank you for your rhetoric.
Okay, well, that's the first time I've heard you say that.
We've been
Well, that was
campaigning
very
for the
useful.
establishment of a sovereign wealth fund
On the
for
record.
longer than you've been the chair, so I'm pleased to
You've been in
inform
favour
you.
of the Future Fund since when?
We've been campaigning for a sovereign wealth fund for longer than you've been the
Okay.
chair, so I'm pleased that you're now
Well, good on you.
aware of our support for your
I set one
organisation.
up. I set one up in 2006.
Well, congratulations.
So
Congratulations.
you've been supporting us ever since.
Congratulations. We don't support your investment in fossil fuels, but I'm sure that's not news to you.
Which
I
is
want to take you
central
to an
to our
earlier...
economic prosperity and to our capacity.
Well, we know your views, Minister
and
Cormann.
very sound views, if I might say so myself.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Well, no, if you don't mind, sorry, I've only just got the
one at a
call back, and
time.
I would like
One
to
at a
try
time.
to get to the end of my questions, if I may.
If it's just a single follow-up
Just a
question,
follow-up.
Senator
Just a single
Cameron,
follow-up
I think
question.
we've allowed
Can I ask a
that.
follow-up question on Senator Waters' line of questioning that we should divest from fossil fuels? Mr Costello, in your view, if we were to follow that strategy, would we be, would the future fund be in breach of its mandate given by the Parliament to maximise returns and specifically to make a return of CPI plus 4%, I think you said?
I think if the Future Fund Board decided it was going to take an asset which was produced by the taxpayers of Australia, that is budget surpluses, and play politics with it, I think that would be a breach of the spirit, if not the letter of the law. This is not, I just want to say, this is not a political plaything here. The surpluses that were invested in the Future Fund didn't just materialise. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of taxpayers paying for them. And we are seeking to maximise the value for those taxpayers. Now, whilst the government stands by this legislation and every government since the Future Fund was established has stood by this legislation, we will act in accordance with the legislation. If you want us to change the legislation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Costello, earlier you said, and I jotted down, that you want returns over the long term of 4.5 to 5.5%. But Mr Neal, you were quoted, as we started to get to a little while ago, as saying that you acknowledge that demand for fossil fuels will fall in the long term. There seems to be a bit of a discrepancy there. If you're acknowledging that fossil fuel demand will drop over the long term and yet you want returns over the long term, are you not considering reducing your exposure to fossil fuel investment?
I'm not sure I acknowledged the certainty of demand falling. I think what I was talking about was that there are risks that demand for all sorts of assets, all sorts of products can change, and the valuation of investments that produce or are involved in any product, that valuation will change as that outlook changes itself. So, our job is to find investments, or our managers' jobs on our behalf is to find investments that have good prospective returns. They will assess the risks to the outlook for whatever it is they produce, those companies produce, and form a view on the value and the prospective returns accordingly. That is a job that we expect our investment managers to do.
Okay. Well, look, given that as climate science rather than politics has established that we need to stay below 2 degrees of warming in order to have a livable planet, and that to require that 2/3 of fossil fuels need to stay in the ground, does the fund accept that the companies that you invest in with fossil fuel reserves on their balance sheet might be therefore overvalued by approximately 2/3?
I think that would be a fairly significant leap of logic. There are many things which come into the valuation of a company. It's the price of what it produces, the amount of what it produces that it can sell, when it sells it, does it sell it now, does it sell it later, changing regulation, changing tax systems. So I think it's a more complex equation than that. But as I've said, we expect our managers to have regard to all risks that affect the investments that they make, and they put a balanced judgment on that and form a view which investments to make and which they won't make.
Okay, so has the fund assessed the risk to your balance sheet of a rapid decarbonisation of the global economy?
The fund invests. There are many different outcomes. The one thing that we know for sure is that we don't know what the future looks like. So the way that the fund structures its portfolio is to be as robust as possible to a very wide range of different outcomes. It's why we have a very diversified portfolio across many thousands of stocks and into other sectors, into credit, into property, into infrastructure. Very broadly diversified portfolio so that we are not overexposed to any one particular risk.
Okay, so you do conduct assessments of risks of carbon exposure?
We expect, so when we get down into remembering, we invest through investment managers, so the individual stock holdings are picked by investment managers on our behalf. Our process ensures that those managers have regard to all the risks affecting those stocks, including the risks of changing regulation for carbon-related investments or changing demand for carbon-related investments. Their role is to understand those risks and price those accordingly.
Okay. Do you report on the exposure of the portfolio to the risk of a carbon bubble or stranded assets at all?
We've been asked that question a couple of times through this committee. It's a extremely difficult question to answer. So we have attempted to provide an answer to that using the sort of standard industry classifications in the past, and we've provided that answer here. We've noted that that's a really uncertain way of doing it. Our view is that the only way really you can understand that is by understanding the companies that are investing and what their exposures are in great detail, and that is obviously something that we ask our investment managers to do on our behalf.
So is that a yes?
I think it's complicated and yes, through our investment managers we do that.
Okay. Do you participate at all in what's called the Carbon Disclosure Project?
No, we don't.
Okay. Is that a board decision or an investment manager decision?
That was a decision taken by the management team.
By the
management team.
Which is the board or the investment managers?
No, we didn't refer that to the board, by the internal team, the agency.
Okay. So why was that decision taken?
We felt that the survey would not be a particularly useful survey for us, given our structure and the way that we manage the portfolio.
And why is that? Why would it not be useful?
Because, as I said, we believe the best way to manage these risks is by asking our investment managers, who have a very detailed understanding of these companies and the exposures, all of the exposures, not just their carbon exposures, but all of the exposures. We believe that they are in the best position to manage our exposure to these kinds of risks.
So they're doing that detailed investigation?
They are understanding as best as they possibly can all of the material risk exposures to all of the companies in which they invest.
And what sort of methodology do they use to assess carbon exposure risk?
We have 90 investment managers in our portfolio, so they would all have very different methodologies for how they think about that. I can't answer that question. I can't answer
You
that.
just let them do their own thing? There's 90 different ways of doing it?
No, we don't. We choose our managers because they are high-quality managers at making good investment decisions and balancing as best as they can all of the different risks that impact on the investments in our portfolio.
So how specifically do they deal with the carbon exposure risk?
I can't answer that question because there are 90 different processes, so they would all have different ways of thinking about those types of risks.
Well, if I could request you to take on notice an answer to that question, because I'm concerned that you as the managing director are not across how your investment managers factor in really significant economic, not to mention environmental issue. So I really would like to understand how it is that carbon risk exposure is being factored into the investment decisions of the fund. I think that's a very important point. So I really look forward to
Mr. Neil
some
has
more
answered
detail.
that question, but if you can provide some further detail, I'm sure he'll do his best.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, because all he said was he didn't know what his investment managers, they all had their own methodology. Not that you didn't know,
That's
but
what
that they
I
all
said. That
had their own methodology.
There are 90 different methodologies because there are 90 different investment managers.
Okay, well, I'm interested of the 90, of the ones who do in fact consider carbon exposure, how does that inform their decisions and what methodology do they use to determine that, particularly if you're not participating in that carbon disclosure project? If you could take that on notice,
we will have
thank
to take that
you
on
very
notice.
much.
There are other senators with questions, Senator Waters. Do you have continuing questions?
I do, thank you, Chair. You in that same article of the Sydney Morning Herald in mid-October, you quoted as saying that you weren't sure how much risk there is already priced into fossil fuel shares. Do you have a means of finding that out?
There are no... I'm not sure. I mean, these are always sort of sometimes career-limiting statements, but I can assure you I'm not sure of anything in relation to the future risks. The investing world is not like that. So, our job is to, for the types of risks, is to make our own assessment of what we think the balance of risks may be. It's for our managers to try and understand what the balance of risks may be, and to continue to try and balance those against the opportunities that particular investments offer. So, I'm certainly not sure of any risks that are faced. We do our best job to kind of understand and estimate them and offset them against the opportunities.
Okay, but I was sort of met with perplexed an attempt at humiliation perhaps earlier when I asked if anyone was familiar with climate science, in particular the Nature paper. I just want to get to the fundamental...
Senator Wallace, I completely object to that characterisation. That is
Well, I didn't feel humiliated, but I do think you were trying to.
I'm not responsible for how you feel, but I reject the assertion that you've made there.
Certainly don't
You should
purport
withdraw
to
the
speak
allegation.
for you. Well, I'll withdraw any inference as to your motives. They are completely foreign to me, so I'll leave those to you to have. My apologies for harping on about this, but I do genuinely want to understand how you're factoring in the risks of climate change, both environmentally and economically, to your investment decisions, because, this is serious on both of those fronts, and I apologise, but I still don't have an understanding of how it is that the fund is doing that.
I feel as though I've answered that question. Our investment managers are tasked every day with understanding the balance of risks and opportunities across all of the investments that they make, and they do that both for climate-related risks and every other risk, and that is their role, and that's what we require them to do. Investing is a very complicated business there are many, many moving parts that can influence the returns and risks of any investment. Climate is one of them, and we require our managers to build that into their assessments.
Okay, well, if you could take on notice for me when you're making those investigations about the methodology that they employ, whether any of those have read that 2009 Nature paper about the amount of fossil fuels that need to stay in the ground in order to have a safe climate and therefore a functioning economy. I'd be quite interested, and I've suggested some excellent reading for anyone who's interested in